In today's video, Tender is the Flesh is an absolute favourite novel of mine, but how does Augustina Bazterrica's follow-up short story collection 19 Claws and a Blackbird compare? It's been advertised as Sally Rooney meets Shuggie Bain, but is Juno Loves Legs worth the hype? Or is fellow new release Irish novel The Rachel Incident by Catherine O'Donoghue better? The debut novel from Colin Walsh, Karl, makes it a hat-trick of Irish novels. A college professor has an unhealthy sexual obsession with his Pakistani co-worker in Sonora Jha's The Laughter. Tahari Jones's 2018 Woman's Prize-winning novel An American Marriage. The classic Jane Austen Gothic satire Northanger Abbey. An American man tries to track down his parents in Dust Child. Liv Little writes about a broken black working-class feminist poet in Rosewater. A feminist Nigerian historical fiction in Tomorrow I Become a Woman, and Ghanese author Peace Adzo Medie follows up her hit His Only Wife with Nightbloom. Hello, welcome to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. My name is Scott, and this is a regular video that I do where I discuss a bunch of books I've read recently. If you're here, why not hit that like button? It really helps the channel. And if you want to, please consider subscribing. I've had an overall positive reading time of late, and I've got a bunch of fantastic books to explode your TBR with. But I'm going to start with the worst books I've read and work my way up to the best. And I'm beginning with the 4 books I DNF'd. The Other Eden by Paul Harding. Right, so this book begins with a man collecting apple seeds from all the different varieties of apples so he can grow apple trees. And I nearly DNF'd it then and there. It really annoys me when authors don't research the things they're writing about. And I know, I get it, you don't know what you don't know, but how many people read this novel pre-publication? I thought maybe the character doesn't understand how apple trees work and this is going to be a big disappointment for him later on. But then later on, golden delicious apple seeds were planted and became golden delicious apple trees. All the varieties of apple you love are grafted. They're not grown from seed. When that happens, you get a new variety. I probably could have forgiven the factual inaccuracies, but this book was really boring. And when the author started telling instead of showing, that was it. That is one of the worst crimes an author can do, I think. Sometimes I DNF a book because it just doesn't connect with me or it's the wrong type of book for me. It's often not that it's a bad book, but that it's a bad match. But this book is honestly terrible. Loot by Tania James. This book has a great cover, doesn't it? It's an Indian historical fiction set during the period of the French Revolution, and it follows a French clockmaker living in India and an Indian man seeking to learn his craft. But this book just didn't keep my interest. It was too slow paced and I became bored. So bye-bye. Ada's Room. This book follows several women called Ada, all living in different time periods and locations. This book has a lot in it. A love affair with Charles Dickens, a woman in prison in a brothel during Nazi Germany, and a timeline in 15th century Ghana when a pregnant woman encounters Portuguese slavers. It's a very ambitious novel, and it's one of those novels that is going to be hard to keep the reader interested because there are so many timelines that you need to build at once, and that is what this has failed at. It just didn't keep my interest. It just became a bit boring, so DNF. The East Indian by Brinda Charry. I predicted this book for the Booker, and I was really looking forward to reading it. It is essentially the story of an Indian man who ends up in America when it was first being settled by Europeans, and I thought that this could have been a really interesting dissection of race, with witnessing the different attitudes towards this Indian man, towards Indigenous Americans, and towards black slaves. But this book just failed to grip me. I didn't really dislike this book, but it was really just heading towards the meh category, so I decided to read something else. Onto the books I'm finished. The Chrysalis by Anna Metcalf. You know, my basic theory of DNFing is I need to have a feel for the book first. I want to understand what I think is going on and decide whether I'm not into it or not, decide if I'm going to get something out of the book. And while I don't have that idea of what the book is doing, I just keep reading and waiting for something. And this book, it had nice writing, it had nice characters, well-built characters, it had no plot, or no themes. And it was just a mystery without an answer or a purpose. Told in 3 parts, all to do with this woman who is an influencer, but she doesn't get a voice in this, and surely that means something. She goes to the gym, she is very strong, she has this magnetic personality, she eats a lot. She works out a lot, she meditates, she's strong, she enjoys moving very slowly, she seems incredibly selfish and to not care about abuse towards her. And none of this was explained. I can tell that Anna Metcalf is a talented author by her sentences and her characters, but I have no idea what she was doing here, and I really disliked this book. Actually, I'm going to go so far as to say I hated this. If you've read this book, let me know in the comments. What was it about? I don't know if this book went completely over my head or if it was just so simple and just like an ambient novel with a feeling to it. 19 Claws and a Blackbird. This really has to go down as a bit of a disappointment. Tender is the Flesh is a novel that I really love. I could tell that this was Argentinian horror, but I could not tell it was Augustina Bazterrica. It kind of has similarities with Life Ceremonies by Sayaka Murata, her short story collection, but I can really see the superiority of Murata's collection when I compare the two. If you really only enjoy Murata's creepy weirdness, you'll probably also love Bazterrica's collection. But if you like Murata's social commentary, this just doesn't have that level. I will never like the short story as much as I like the novel. I love that messy complexity that a novel has. I love seeing the themes interact, and that doesn't happen with a short story, but it can be there with a short story collection, and that's what I'm really looking for in a collection. Stories that add upon the other stories that you've already read, an interconnectivity of ideas or themes. What we got is a lot of the same tricks, just done in different stories with different characters. Some of the stories were super short, way shorter than I would consider a short story. Definitely some flash fiction included in this collection. Stories that are 1 or 2 pages it's just too short for me. I can't do that. And I realize that this is a dangerously negative review. That's more about my disappointment than the overall quality. I still really liked some of the stories. I really enjoyed the story about the man who was convinced he was dating an alien. And I loved the story about the fan of Boca Juniors watching Boca play River Plate. That was definitely my favorite story there. And trigger warning for this one, children have some very bad things done to them. All of the bad things are done to them. Strangers to Ourselves, Rachel Aviv. Look, I do read non-fiction sometimes. Actually, I really like non-fiction, but I just prefer fiction, so I hardly ever reach for non-fiction. This is a book about a variety of people with different mental illnesses and how the treatment they receive has changed over the years and how it failed them. It's about what we do when a mental illness comes up against the limits of our own knowledge and how the system can make it worse for some people. The author herself had anorexia at age 6. This is pretty raw. It's a pretty simple book in all honesty. I don't think there was anything special or revelatory about it, but it really does deliver on what it promises, so I think it's quite a successful book. Karl by Colin Walsh. This book has been getting a lot of hype lately. It is a literary thriller, and I think it's much more of a thriller. And if you're a thriller fan, it's done that genre excellently. If you're a literary fiction fan, I mean, it's far from the least literary novel I've read. But I think that this needs to be advertised and called what it is. It's an exceptional thriller with a hint of something extra. Carla is dead. Her body has just been found, and in her skull, a photo of her with 5 of her friends was placed. And we follow 3 of them, Helen, Joe and Mush. We try to figure out what happened to Carla, and we are constantly jumping between when they were 16 and the final days of Carla's life to the present day when they're 26. Set on the west coast of Ireland in the town of Kinloch, Helen has returned from Canada for her father's wedding and decides to investigate Carla to write an article. Joe is a world famous musician, but he needs time to sober up and returns to live with his parents. And Mush never left. left. But 2 girls go missing when Karl's remains are uncovered, and the 3 explore the underground violence and brutality of the town and the events that could have led to Karl's death. This book really sucked me in. I really invested in it. At one point I was thinking, this book is going to convert me to thrillers. But then it just kept going and I started to lose interest. It was just a bit too long and went from a book that I was loving to just something that was alright to read. Northanger Abbey. This was going to be my only book for Jane Austen July, but I have made the impulse call to join the Frankenstein readathon hosted by Jack and Ange, which will count as one of Jane's contemporaries. But that's next video. This video is about Northanger Abbey, and this book is ridiculous, and that is its charm. If this was the only one of Austen's books published, we probably wouldn't know Austen. This book really probably only exists because of the fame of her other work, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a joy to read. On a side note, I've always wanted to read The Mysteries of Odafen, but I've not got around to it yet, and I regret not reading that before I read Northanger Abbey, because Northanger Abbey is taking the piss out of Gothic literature, specifically Anne Radcliffe, and I just wonder how much more I would have got if I had have been familiar with that novel. I think in all of Austen's work you're getting some sort of commentary on marriage and money, and this book is certainly no exception. But while the usual marriage dance is going on, Catherine Morland convinces herself that she is in a Gothic thriller. I really admire Austen here because it's not easy to write such a likeable idiot, but Catherine Morland is an incredibly likeable idiot. She's very easy to laugh at, and it's very easy to just want her to be happy. Catherine isn't the only idiot in this novel, and she's certainly not the only person Austen mocks. Is there a character that Austen hasn't mocked in her work? I'm starting to wonder if Jane Austen was a nice person. And no, mockery is a form of love. It really is. Not really the best of Austen's work, but a really fun read. And my favourite line was, "Have you read Odafen?" Oh no, if I read a novel, I think it'll be a book by Miss Radcliffe. The Laughter, Sonora Jha. This book is advertising itself for fans of Lolita, Disgrace, and A Little Life. And I kind of get the Disgrace thing, but that's really bad advertising. The author's Asian. Just say it's for fans of R.F. Kuang. It's not. They might like it and you will sell more books. This book is a wonderful satire. It is essentially about an English professor who becomes obsessed with his Pakistani co-worker. And I mean sexually obsessed, and to the point of being ridiculous. At one point she talks about the view from her bedroom window, and he thinks she brought up her bedroom. What woman discusses her bedroom with a man and doesn't want to sleep with him? The Pakistani woman's nephew visits and the English professor befriends him in an attempt to get close to her. Meanwhile, the cops seem to be investigating him as well, but he's 15. But what I love is the nephew's casual racism towards America, because it's exactly the same casual racism that people of colour get from white people, but reversed and said with facts. The first time this happens, the professor asks the nephew if he wants to visit him at his work, and the nephew says that he doesn't want to visit the professor at his work because that's a school, and isn't that where all the shootings happen? It's better to be safe than dead. I was worried that the professor would be a very cringy character, but while he was definitely a pervert and thought some really backwards things, he wasn't that horrible to sit in the head of. He served to illustrate privilege and to illustrate the lack of awareness people with privilege have. And I love how he believed himself to be quite a liberal person, but he continued to contradict that with his action. I really think that this narrative made the book much better without making it too uncomfortable. It's certainly nothing like the discomfort that readers experience when they read Lolita or Disgrace. The general satirical nature of this book keeps it a little bit lighter than it actually is. Dust Child. Phong is the son of a black American soldier and a Vietnamese woman. He has been raised by an orphanage and he wants to track down his parents and to migrate to America. In 1969, 2 sisters, stressed out by their parents' debt, agree to move to the big city and to work drinking tea. Needless to say, their job doesn't end up to be drinking tea. Dan returns to Vietnam with his wife Linda many years after fighting there. Linda helps. This is a way that Dan can recover from his PTSD. Meanwhile, Dan has a secret Vietnamese past he would like to keep hidden from Linda. This is a good book. There are some surprises along the way, but it's pretty much the story you expect. It taught me stuff about Vietnam. I particularly enjoyed finding out about the children of American soldiers and Vietnamese women and the lives they live in Vietnam. This is a consequence of the Vietnam War that I didn't know about before. I also enjoyed the colorism within Vietnamese culture that this included. But this is the second book from this author I have read, and I can see that they're very good books, but they just haven't clicked perfectly for me. I suspect that other readers are going to like this a lot more than I did. I usually have a hard time ranking some of these books, but this video is especially hard. There really isn't a lot between the next 5 books. I enjoyed them all quite a bit, and any other day it could be a completely different order. The Rachel Incident, Catherine O'Donoghue. I really underestimated this novel. This Irish novel is gloriously messy, and I thought that it was going to be one of those depressing messy girls novels. Rachel has a crush on her English professor. The cliche. She works with her best friend and roommate James in a local bookstore and agrees to launch her professor's book in an attempt to seduce him. Then his wife turns up. She works in publishing, where Rachel would like to work one day, and she thinks it's not what you know, but who you know. This book goes in a direction that you don't expect. It's about getting work in Ireland in a struggling economy, love and friendship, coming out as LGBT, being creative, blackmail, unwanted pregnancy, just being poor. There were just 2 little bits of representation that I really loved and that are quite rare. Rachel herself is a very tall girl. I think the book says that she is 6 foot, but she likes to feel dainty, so she is attracted to taller, broader men. I love this. Plenty of women out there are tall, and they're hardly ever represented in books. And also, it's not said, but one of the characters reads very much like they have ADHD. I'm not sure that this was intentional or if the author has just based this character of somebody with ADHD, but they have a lot of the personality traits that are common with that. And as somebody with ADHD, it's really nice to see that in a character. Really nice writing, really good characters, and just a fun, enjoyable read that are touching on some really deep, dark issues. An American Marriage, Tayari Jones, winner of the Woman's Prize, and just a good book. Roy and Celestial are in love. They are recently married. And then Roy is accused of raping a woman. Roy was with Celestial on the night that he was said to have raped the woman, but he is still found guilty and sent to jail. But this is not a story about injustice within the justice system, but rather this is a human story about 2 people and the loved ones around them. This is about the human cost and not about justice. Is it fair to expect Celestial to stay with Roy when he has been in jail for longer than they have been married? At one point, Roy says to Celestial that she looks different, and she replies, "Well, I'm older, Roy." There are so many good things about Tayari Jones's writing here. Roy is not perfect, and he's frustrated and depressed and under all kinds of stress and can't do what he would like to do. As a consequence, at times, he acts badly. He's not a perfect man to begin with, but this sort of stress puts him under more pressure. But it's very easy to understand where he's coming from, to empathize with him, and you can disagree with his actions. You know, you can say that's not cool, but also you can say, you're in jail, you're going through a lot, I can forgive you for these things. And you feel for Celestial. You want her to move on from Roy. You want her to find happiness for herself. But also, you feel for Roy and you want her to wait for him. You are supporting 2 separate things that cannot coexist. I really want to state that this book is about relationships and emotion, and it is not a book about jail system. It's not about racism or those sort of political issues. And the reason I really want to make this super clear is that I'm looking through the reviews reviews of this book, and I'm seeing so many negative reviews. Almost all of them, I think, because they are expecting one type of book and getting another. And I completely understand. As a reader, that is one of the most annoying things that you can have, and that can really ruin a book. Go into this understanding that it's one type of book and not another. I think that this is an ideal book for readers who would enjoy both literary fiction and romance, but probably not very good if you only like one of those genres. Rosewater, Liv Little. This is great. It is advertised as for fans of Such a Fun Age or Queenie, and that's probably true, but it very much stands on its own. It's doing its own thing. This book starts with Elsie waking up and having her door being bashed on. She's in bed with a cute woman that she picked up last night, but she's about to get evicted. 28, black, queer, worse than broke, and about to become homeless. Elsie is a poet, she's attractive, and she loves her shaven head. She calls up her best friend Juliet, who she hasn't talked to in 3 months. Juliet provides her with plenty of Drag Race All-Stars, free lodging, and a shoulder to cry on. This is the beginning of the book. This is the setup, and I think there's a lot there already, but there is more still to come. Juliet suggests Elsie gets a job with her. Not her day job teaching, but her night job webcamming. Juliet's boyfriend doesn't seem to like Elsie. Elsie, for her part, returns the feelings. But is this to do with their dislike for each other, or is this to do with Juliet being bisexual? Juliet has a wonderful relationship with her mother. Elsie does not, and she resents being made to look after the twins, her younger brothers. Elsie's mother is controlling, but she doesn't even know what's happening in her daughter's life. Elsie is a bit of a hoe, and Juliet does seem to judge her a little bit for this. But also, Elsie is trying to decide whether she will give sex work and webcamming a go, and that's very, very complex in her head. Elsie hasn't seen her grandmother in a while, but she's moving, and Elsie doesn't think that's fair. She has so many memories in her grandmother's house. Elsie's grandmother is a wonderful character. It is very easy to like Elsie, but she was a very, very flawed character. She was really in her feelings. She couldn't cope. Life had just thrown way too much at her, and I really understood the mistakes she was making and why she was making them. I understood why it took her so long to figure things out and why she was acting selfishly sometimes. I know this is the sort of book where some readers will say they didn't find Elsie's actions believable or realistic, but I strongly believed everything she did, and I think anybody who can't relate to Elsie is very, very lucky. I loved the representation of exploiting the poor by the rich, the sort of everybody kicks down society that we live in. I loved the conversation around sex work and judgment, and I loved that it involved webcamming as this sort of new emerging form of sex work. And I know I've already said that this was advertised for fans of Queenie and Such a Fun Age, but I really want to say if you're a fan of You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, Mame, or D-Transition Baby, this is the sort of book that you might like too. Again, another good one for readers who like romance and literary fiction. Tomorrow I Become a Woman. This is a really good one for fans of Ayabami Adebayo, a brutal feminist historical fiction, a book that is critical of the value placed upon women in Nigerian society. A book about 3 issues central to being a Nigerian woman: domestic violence, children, and education. Obayanju's uncle Ikenna has been missing since the Nigerian Civil War. Her mother loved him and follows all sorts of reports in the hope of finding him. So when she meets Gozi and he asks to marry her, her mother calls her an idiot for needing time to think about it. But Obayanju has feelings for Akin. But Akin isn't Igbo, but he makes her feel heard and understood, while Gozi makes her heart skip a beat. No sooner married, and Gozi starts to try and control her life, her body, her education, and he is backed up by her mother. This is raw and powerful and emotional and full of pure feminist rage and generational change. If you like miserable and emotionally devastating books or strong female characters, this is a must-read. Definitely one of the best Nigerian novels I've read, and I really like Nigerian novel. And it's a historical fiction to boot. Who doesn't like historical fiction? Juno loves legs. Karl Geary. When I saw that this was advertised as Sally Rooney meets Shuggy Bain, I laughed. Like, does it also lay golden eggs and clean the house? But it's actually fair. If Sally Rooney had have written Shuggy Bain, it would look like this. A working class story of friendship, love and betrayal. This is an unrelentingly bleak coming of age story set in 1980s Dublin about child abuse, homelessness, alcoholism, poverty, losing one's parents, the patriarchal link between the police and the church, misfits, violence, fighting back, art, gay culture, being rejected by your family, of loss, of love and friendship. It is beautifully written and it does walk right up to the line of trauma porn. And some readers are going to say that it's crossed that and left it well and truly behind, but I think Geary has done a wonderful job of injecting just enough hope into this story to break your heart again and again and to make you feel constantly miserable. I think you know if this is a book for you. It's a sad book, people. Definitely one to be considered for the Booker Prize. My best book from this list is, however, Nightbloom by Peace Adzo Medie. I really enjoyed His Only Wife. It was a really good debut novel. But this book is the author evolving. This is a slow burn that will suck you in and it gradually gets better. Two cousins and childhood friends, Celeste and Akaphora, growing up together in Gardner when Celeste starts to change and grows distant towards Akaphora. I love the structure of this book. First you get Akaphora's story and it goes for 20 years. And then you get Celeste's story, which also goes for 20 years. But it makes you want to go back to Akaphora's story because the two views of the events are so totally different. It is a completely different story. And as a reader, this just really worked for me. Akora eventually goes to America to study and discovers with shock the racist hurdle she has to face to succeed. I really like that it's explored through this angle of cultural shock. It was just so effective at getting me in the head of a Ghanese immigrant. Celeste, meanwhile, stays in Ghana and opens a restaurant and discovers the different obstacles she has to face to achieve and to keep success. By the time the two women are in their 30s, their lives are seemingly moving in very different directions, but then the plot pulls them back together, and that's when our third and final part of the book begins. And this is where you start to realize what the author is doing, and this third part, this really kicks ass. It is such a wonderfully crafted story. It's a book about corruption, racism, money, education and power. It is a very, very feminist novel, but I don't want to say exactly how or what it was doing because part of the joy of this book is the slow understanding of what's happening and how everything is linked. Two very likable but very different kick-ass women, strong, passionate and powerful in the exact opposite ways. Medie takes her time to draw these women properly, but by the end of it you really know them and you really like them. They are awesome. An absolutely magnificent novel, and I know I haven't given you as much detail as I really would like to try and sucker you in and buy this, but please trust me, read this novel. Top quality writing. If you only slightly liked His Only Wife, pick this one up. It is easily 10 times better. Let me know any thoughts you have on any of these books, and if you just want to say that you were here, leave me any emoji you can find that has a star in it. I hope to see you on the weekend with a new video. Bye bye.